Hello, my name is Laura George, and I'm the Executive Director of the Oracle Institute. It's a 501c3 educational charity located at the Peace Pentagon in Independence, Virginia. And we are a spiritual think tank. We study the nexus between politics, economics, human rights, and eventually get to discerning what are the trends in the spirituality area. We believe that humanity is undergoing a major paradigm shift that ultimately will herald a new era of conscious evolution. Today, it is my honor to provide the following presentation for JFK University on the future faces of spirit, what we at the Oracle Institute call the fifth spiritual paradigm. Today, we stand at a precipice, a massively complex and chaotic void that separates the passing paradigm and a new one that is struggling to be born. There are a variety of ways to study this void, what we at Oracle call the Great Cusp. And a good place to start our examination of the upcoming changes is through the current and predominant postmodern lens. Within the current milieu of anything goes relativism, predicting the future of religion and spirituality is like trying to herd cats. And we can add to the mix fake news, Russian bots, populism, and a dash of nihilism. At Oracle, we reject relativism and seek objective truth. Indeed, our mission statement is Thomas Jefferson's Act for Religious Freedom, which reads in part, "Truth is great and will prevail if left to herself as the proper and sufficient antagonist to error, and has nothing to fear from conflict unless, by human interposition, truth is disarmed of her natural weapons, free argument and debate. Error is ceasing to be dangerous when truth is permitted freely to contradict them." Unfortunately, Thomas Jefferson may have been a little overly optimistic about truth being able to defend herself. So we do need to save her. Due to the demise of objective truth, it becomes even more challenging for us to predict the shape of the future faces of spirit. Relative truth is the notion that ideas change, that truth changes based on our differences in perception, culture, and identity. It's the belief that there is no universal truth. There is no objective way of discerning truth, rather that each point of view is credible and has merit. Absolute truth, on the other hand, is the idea that truth is objectively discernible, testable, reliable in all instances. Truth, even moral absolutism, can be validated regardless of circumstances, culture, religion, beliefs, culture, opinions. And one of my personal heroes, Mahatma Gandhi, said, "There is no God higher than truth." So the spectrum of consciousness and understanding it also will help us understand why people believe what they believe and why relativism is so popular right now in terms of how humans view the world. Another way to predict the future faces of spirit is to examine with a spiritual paradigm lens, looking at the paradigms that humanity has passed through to date. Without a doubt, looking into the past will help us predict the future. So let me share the historical model that we use at the Oracle Institute when discerning the spiritual eras humanity has passed through to date. The first spiritual paradigm was when humanity could be perceived to either be still within the Godhead itself, in the sense of complete unity before any separation, and even after the Big Bang, in the sense that early humans were completely organic. They were a part of the natural world, just as we think of animals being today. And for those who are biblical literalists, you can think of this era as the Garden of Eden, before the discovery of free will, so to speak. The second paradigm we describe as an era where goddess worship and the Great Mother was predominant. That doesn't mean these were all matriarchal societies, but it does mean that early humans, due to the fact that women gave birth to offspring, assumed in many cases that God had to be female. And this era, if you'll note, was the longest living paradigm to date, about 20,000 years. The third spiritual paradigm came in around 5000 BCE, and this we call the epic of gods and goddesses. This was the time of all the great pantheons, from the Babylonian culture to Samaria to the Greeks, the Romans, all the pantheons that we think of, which are now in our history books. And indeed, only one religion birthed during this paradigm still is a practicing religion, and that's Hinduism. And there are very interesting reasons why Hinduism survived. But humanity then entered the fourth spiritual paradigm. This was the era of God the Father, and the Abrahamic religions are predominantly responsible for ushering in this new view of the Godhead. It's interesting that humanity came back to the notion of monotheism, but seemed incapable of yet visualizing a Godhead that's both genderful and genderless. So we ended up with God the Father, and that is the paradigm that we're still in, but which is passing. We believe that we stand at the dawn of a fifth spiritual paradigm. I chose the date 2012 just because of the New Age obsession with the ending of the Mayan calendar. But this is the epoch during which we believe the Godhead will become balanced. The trickle-down deity theory, which we posit at the Oracle Institute, is the belief that our values mirror our view of the Godhead, and that our view of the Godhead therefore necessarily impacts our behavior. A corollary of this theory is that suffering stems from a Godhead that is woefully out of balance. For example, poverty, inequality, and wealth are some of the frontline symptoms of a spurious belief system run amok. Another example is the oppression of our Muslim sisters and women worldwide. This sort of discrimination against women is the direct result of a Godhead which is viewed as predominantly male by most of the world. Presently, we're witnessing a worldwide reevaluation of religions that formed during the fourth spiritual paradigm. And again, most of them got their value systems from the Abrahamic religions. The result is spiritual chaos of epic proportions, the kind that occurs during a major paradigm shift. The last time that humans experienced this level of social chaos was when Jesus walked the earth. And stated another way, when the Godhead shifts, so does the paradigm. And thereafter, a true revolution in the spiritual realm ensues, and the dawn of a distinctly different era. It's important to note that no previous paradigm shift has occurred without great dissonance on the personal level and without great social upheaval. Indeed, this is the most dangerous paradigm shift in human history, given the state of our technology and some of the madmen in control of the weaponry. So the Great Cusp describes this period of spiritual chaos which always accompanies a major shift. And I'm going to make this first prediction that I doubt this is going to end or that we're going to pass through it in a smooth manner. This notion that it's going to be a blissful, magical transition is something that the New Age community really has latched onto. And the reality is that evolution in the spiritual realm, just as in any other, is a very slow and tedious process. Consequently, we're facing many dangers during this great cusp. It will be an imminent battle between those who have a vested interest in the past and those who dream of a better future. As Ken Wilber said in The Religion of Tomorrow, right now humanity is in a desperate race between the 70% that remain at ethnocentric or lower levels and the 30% or so at world-centric and higher levels. Another way to examine the future faces of spirit is through a classic developmental lens. And so I'm going to pull up a slide. It's the classic slide by Abraham Maslow on the hierarchy of needs. Most people are familiar with this model since it's even taught at the high school level in sociology and psychology classes. So I don't need to belabor it, particularly for what I'm also predicting will be a sophisticated audience for this series of videos. But as you can see, this was a way to categorize people based on their deficiency needs, their sufficiency needs, and higher level needs such as self-esteem and self-actualization. I found that this Maslow model is a wonderful foundation for discussing what we're leading up to, which is the spectrum of consciousness, especially within the New Age community, which generally hates spiral dynamics due to their lingering infatuation with postmodern relativism. And as an interfaith minister who happens to live at the tip of the Bible Belt in southwestern Virginia, I've also found that using Maslow's hierarchy of needs is something people are more familiar with here. So sometimes that also can help facilitate discussions about progressive and pluralistic ideas that down here are not so well accepted. So another way to look at the future faces of spirit is to use a more advanced integral lens, which is what we're going to focus on today. To me, it's clearly the best model in terms of both guiding our work and also predicting the future of spirituality. We at the Oracle Institute consider this the most advanced model, and in fact, we use it almost daily to evaluate ourselves, our students, the members of our church, and also potential members of our community, the Valley of Light. But I feel we need to give credit where credit is due. Wilbur, this didn't spring out of Wilbur's head like Athena jumping out of Zeus's. The spectrum of consciousness actually stems from the research of Clare Graves and his emergence cyclical levels of existence theory. In the 1950s, Clare Graves was a psychology professor at Union College in Schenectady, New York, and he taught an introductory class on psychology in which his students often asked him what therapies work the best when treating someone suffering from a mental health disorder. Well, Dr. Graves started thinking about this question, and he admitted that none of the therapies developed by that time, the mid-20th century, were really addressing the needs of every patient. You know, so for instance, why did some respond to a Freudian approach versus a behavioral approach that Skinner was promoting? Eventually, the notion gave Dr. Graves a research idea. So he decided to query his students on what they thought a healthy adult believes. At this stage of the study, Dr. Graves asked a team of his academic peers to analyze the students' responses to see if there was a pattern emerging. And there was a pattern emerging. There were two categories, those that he labeled sacrifice self and express self. Then additionally, two subgroups emerged within each of these two main classifications. And under the sacrifice self category was the belief that a healthy person will sacrifice to get a reward later, or a healthy person might sacrifice to get acceptance now. Under the express self category, a healthy person would express self even at the expense of others. And the other notion was that a healthy person would express self, but not at the expense of others. In the next stage of the experiment, Dr. Graves watched as his students discussed their views. He wanted to see which of the students would change their belief system based on peer influence. And then during the last stage, he brought in some of his peers, some other academics, and he also taught the students the classic definitions of what a healthy human is to see if they might change their opinion based on authoritarian or expert opinion. And interestingly enough, he saw that one group was susceptible first to the peer pressure. Another group was then susceptible to the authoritarian pressure. But there was a third group that no matter what they heard or read or saw, they weren't going to change their minds. Eventually, Dr. Graves was able to map this interesting levels of consciousness that he was seeing. And it was then his prize students, Don Beck and Chris Cohen, who took over and developed spiral dynamics, which probably most of the viewers of this video series are also familiar with. They took it to the next level. Let's take a look. In classic spiral dynamics, this is the map that's creative. There are 8 memes, the first 6 of which are in the first tier, the second, or the last 2 are in the second tier. We're going to go into these in more detail, But these were the initial labels for these memes, most of which came from Dr. Graves. In their 1996 book, Spiral Dynamics, they talked about the first tier being the subsistence levels. So that's harkening back to Maslow terminology. And then they said that the second tier was represented by those people who already had reached a state of health where they could focus on others almost exclusively. They also noticed that the second tier group dropped judgment and were not condemning or belittling of the first tier memes. Now let's look at Wilber's integral theory a little closer. Wilber's been called the Einstein of consciousness due to his synthesis of nearly all of these other lenses, and also due to his Buddhist training. At the ripe old age of 23, in 1973, Wilber wrote his first book, The Spectrum of Consciousness. And he would later design the AQUAL map, all quadrants, all levels. So on the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see the current map that Wilber is still perfecting. And you can see the progression from Claire Graves to Beck and Cohen to Wilber in terms of moving us sort of from a two-dimensional map to a three-dimensional map. And we're not going to go into integral theory in depth other than just to point out that it is a very interesting model from the standpoint of we don't just study individual subjective interior or how people behave. We also look at how cultures subjectively think of themselves and then what sort of societies they manifest. All of these vantage points contribute to us predicting the future face of spirituality. And so let's get to it. This is going to be fun. When I contemplate the upcoming fifth spiritual paradigm and what it will look like, I not only rely on the spectrum of consciousness as a guide, I also, believe it or not, think of dogs. In general, a dog is a dog is a dog. We can say that, you know, some breeds are more loyal, some breeds are smarter, some breeds are, you know, better at going after birds. But basically, when we talk about dogs, we can say they belong to a species of their own, and we can make generalizations about dogs. Not so with humans. And that's why this map is just so important for those of us who are trying to figure out what's going on in the world, how to help the world, and also answer the question that was posed to me in the series, what do I think is going to happen? There's a quote attributed to Robert Benchley that goes thus: there are two kinds of people in the world, those who divide people into two kinds of people and those who don't. And I like using this quote to get us started because if we're going to predict the future face of spirit, we absolutely are going to have to break the world up into categories or memes. And some people view this approach as divisive. Some also think it's oversimplifying a complex tapestry. But for me, it seems the only logical way to make sense of the great cusp and hopefully have an impact on the next paradigm. Also, I want to say that the Oracle Institute, we see no other way to execute our mission, which is to help build a better world without using this model. We feel it's very important to understand the realities on the ground. I mean, we have two people solely dedicated to following news around the world. That's how serious we are about being real. And while everybody here also has a very spiritual side, we feel it's just absolutely paramount that that no one stick their head in the sand and that everybody stay abreast of what's happening. So let's focus on the spectrum of consciousness. Simply stated, the spectrum encompasses the vast variety of interior belief systems expressed by humans. It also can be used to chart our collective process and to chart humanity's evolutionary progress from our current era into the next. This is a version of the spectrum of consciousness that I created for teaching purposes at the Oracle Institute. And I want to discuss some of the basic features of this map before we delve into each meme. First, look at the left column. Notice that they alternate between I and we stages. with the odd number memes being more self-centered and the even memes being more group-centered. This is one of the results from Dr. Graves' work. Next, look at the bottom row. These fields contain subdescriptors within each meme. For example, the cognition and physiology column indicates an average age when many people pass through these vertical stages of development. However, a person gets stuck at any stage. We also will discuss how identity and worldview change at each of these stages. And most importantly for this JFK youth series, we're going to examine each meme's view of the Godhead. The last two columns summarize the US population percentage and power percentage as we move up the chart. These columns buttress what you likely already know, that our elected representatives are not keeping pace with emerging new humans. Also bear in mind that the experts say there is no leapfrogging from one level to the next. In other words, each of us will pass through these memes sequentially during our quest for greater and greater awareness. However, an evolved soul could quickly move through these stages. For instance, the Dalai Lama may have moved out of level 3 power obsession by the time he was 5. He may have pushed a fellow student, a friend, and been immediately ashamed, never again expressing himself at the expense of another. However, here in the US, most people never make it past stage 5, which also could be referred to as the materialistic meme. Lastly, keep in mind that consciousness experts uniformly agree on the conditions required in order for us to experience vertical movement up the spectrum. It takes dissonance, serious dissonance, and exterior conditions must be pretty bad for us to start questioning our interior belief system and wanting to go beyond it. Someone or something must challenge us in a serious way. And one last thing I want to mention, there is the possibility of backslide on the chart, particularly with regard to first tier memes. Many believe that once you hit second tier, you're not going to backslide, and hopefully that's true. But under stress, it is evident that the first tier memes will regress. So now we're going to start looking at these memes. We're going to go really quickly through the first two. Stage 1 is one of the subsistence stages that Dr. Graves called an automatic existence. The stage 1 person is someone who lives a merely instinctual life in response to bodily needs and urges. So in most cultures, we're talking about babies. Immediate gratification is the hallmark of this stage, as in the case of an infant. And this is considered a 9 meme because the person is not cognizant of life beyond his own needs. Stage 2 is described by Dr. Graves as the tribalistic existence. At this stage, a person is aware of danger and seeks stable environment above all else. The sense of self has not emerged in the modern sense, as he lives an organic experience with fellow humans and in this entire world. His sense of time is seasonal, and his sense of cause and effect is undeveloped. Consequently, he makes little distinction between himself and the other components of nature. He has a beehive mentality with his clan, who are usually related by blood. Older members are respected for knowing the history of the clan and the basis for the rituals, and loyalty is prized above all else. As a result of his inability to distinguish between himself and his tribe and his world, a person at this level sees spirit in everything and has a view of the Godhead based on animism and also typically matriarchy. Tradition and magical thinking are the hallmarks of this stage, with authority given to elders who are practiced in the arts of both survival and superstition. This was the stage that we were all at 40,000 years ago, and there are very few humans living at this we level today. Tension is very rare in a stage 2 environment as long as it remains isolated. And that's because the elders maintain a firm grip on tradition and indoctrinate the youth from birth. However, dissonance will creep in if the family union is visited by strangers or if new or divergent traditions are introduced. And dissonance will occur, particularly if a younger member questions the authority of the elders or attempts to introduce an innovative idea. Thus, when this sort of insight is gained, tribe members will start to separate from the group and from the group think. When this happens, This would be a person who is anxious to test himself. And this is the emergence of the self that's going to lead to the next meme. So let me, I'm going to switch now. We're going to start talking about the next level, stage 3. This is where things get really interesting because it is the first fully conscious and separately promoting I meme. Dr. Graves called it the egocentric existence because a person at this stage feels himself as truly separate. As a result, this can be a pretty harsh meme. But we can also view it in a positive light as it is characteristic of heroism. For instance, who among us hasn't felt pride in overcoming a challenge on our own? Yet pride, when taken too far, can be dangerous. Thus, when a person begins to operate at this level, he tends to sow his wild oats, and he tends to want to test his power, usually to the detriment of others. Today, most of us pass through this phase by the time we hit puberty. And as adults, most of us punish our kids if they dawdle in a bullying phase through adolescence. So this meme is rare in the US, but in much of Africa and the Middle East, dictators reign. And in a 1970 article, Dr. Graves had major concerns about this meme, particularly since we had entered the nuclear age. I'm quoting Dr. Graves. The power ethic shows no fear of the world's wrath, and right is demonstrated in violent action, an aspect of this ethic which may see today but few understand. In the power ethic, the more daring and horrendous the act of man, the more it is revered. It does not matter within the power ethic whether a man has plans for replacement of the system which he attacks. The heroic thing is to attack the system, and if there is nothing present to be attacked, and if he is truly a hero, he will create a dragon to be destroyed. For even if he should die in the course of the attack, he is assured that he will live on forever, in the words of men. This is a perfect description of ISIS and the mess that, frankly, the United States has made in the Middle East. It also is a description of Trump world. Before Trump was elected president, there were few Americans expressing at this level. There were stage 4 folks, and we're going to get to that, but there were very few stage 3 Americans expressing themselves. My theory is that due to increased stress, increased xenophobia, which Trump is fanning, we're not only seeing them speak out because they feel it's okay now to speak out. I think this meme is actually growing. I think we're seeing regression on the spiral. So for instance, what we would have considered a nationalist before, someone from the Great Generation, for instance, may have slipped into becoming a white supremacist. So let's talk about stage 4. That's the next stage. Graves discovered that that stage 3 is the most closed meme. So it is hard to elevate yourself from that worldview. And what he found that kicks it into gear is that people start theorizing about God again, or they start basically contemplating their own mortality. So it's at this point that the person ponders the life cycle of the earth plane, and their attention starts to turn to the ethereal plane. And this notion of salvation kicks in. And he decides that he's willing to sacrifice now to receive a reward later in an afterlife. Dr. Graves called this level the saintly existence because it's a belief system premised on some variation of a heavenly afterlife. Dr. Graves believed that level 4 thinking started around 2500 BC and that it fully emerged with the advent of the 3 Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which all 3 comprise quintessential level 4 belief systems. Dr. Graves argued that it was primarily the stage 3 losers, the have-nots, who fueled the stage 4 belief system. After living ad infinitum under the capricious and abusive rule of landed gentry, the common folk experienced a type of spiritual awakening. The masses simply had to make sense of their miserable lot in life, and the fundamentalist religions offered the promise of justice in the afterworld. Dr. Graves stated, "The saintly form of existence comes from experiencing that living in this world is not made for ultimate pleasure. Here he perceives that certain rules are prescribed for each class of men, and that these rules describe the proper way each class is to behave. The rules are the price man must pay for his more lasting life, for the peace which he seeks, the price of no ultimate pleasure while living. The hallmark of the level 4 meme is personal sacrifice based on a preordained set of rules. And in place of a human ruler, the level 4 person now submits to a heavenly king, who also requires sacrifice, but who at least promises a heavenly reward in exchange for dedicated service. Moreover, in the case of the Abrahamic religions, the stage 4 person bows down to either a rabbi, a priest, an imam, and these people are regarded as God's representatives on earth. There's a strict and a usually patriarchal hierarchy to this existence, complete with clear black and white rules so that every stage 4 person knows right from wrong. Failing that, there's a judgmental deity who keeps track of our actions and decides whether we are ultimately worthy of punishment or a long-awaited reward. The main characteristics of the stage 4 worldview is that it's ethnocentric. This means that level 4s view the world in terms of us and them, and it is a firmly entrenched we meme. And if you're not in their group, your SOL is generally the worldview. Thus, personal freedom is way less important than strict obedience and adherence to structure. Just in the past few months, Pew has reported that about 25% of the US still subscribes to this worldview. I, however, estimate that it could be higher, it could be even 30% because of what's happened with regression down the spiral. It also is clear that they're disproportionately in positions of power in legislature and local cities and governments. So that too presents a challenge. And they're, although not as warlike by nature as stage 3, Dr. Graves felt that this was the most dangerous meme on the planet. Why did he think that? Because this group will kill to protect their turf, their religion, their own. In fact, Graves went so far as to say they'll kill on command. I think that's one of Wilbur's famous sayings too. The upside, of course, are our memories and our dedicated gratitude to the great generation who sacrificed for all of us. So each meme has a positive and a shadow side. The military-industrial complex is a level 4 organization, as is the military in general. And one of the things that Claire Graves wrote that has just stuck with me and I want to share is that the scariest combination is a level 3 dictator in charge of a level 4 nation. And that was the situation with Germany during World War II, with Hitler, a stage 3 psychopath, in charge of a nation that was, willing to take orders. So the fact that this meme is still predominant is dangerous from the standpoint of living through the great cost. So let's talk about what type of dissonance helps someone ascend the spiral. And usually it's starting to question the belief system again. This time it's a surge of independence, it's a desire for self-gratification, which is a new thought, and it is the belief that these rules that I may have been following, they might be man-made and not made by God, or not sent down by God. And once these thoughts sort of start churning, the yearning for freedom and pleasure start to overtake these unproven promises from an unseen God. And at this point, as we say at the Oracle Institute, God goes green. And that leads us into the stage 5 meme. This is another I stage. It's where expression of self is paramount again, but not to the exclusion of what we've learned from the other memes. So this is the stage where, people believe in things like, to the victor goes the spoils, which is why Dr. Graves did call it the materialistic existence. So basically the new golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules. And this is our welcome to Wall Street moment, which we're all living through. Let's look at the chart one more time. So because this is the most populated meme in the US today, I don't need to go into a lot of detail here, except to say that this is a person who's still basically following the rules, or basically following the rules of the game. He may elect to break the rules now again if he thinks he can get away with it. But frankly, this person would much rather become a master chess player and beat you fair and square than beat you by cheating. And so he plays the game of life to prove to himself that he can. And if he can, and if he's successful in the Wall Street sense, he's on top of the world and master of his destiny. And by the way, this person may still go to church, but it's mostly for networking reasons. This is when rationalism and a scientific worldview kick in. And so the extent to which stage 5 believes in God, it's usually, you know, on the periphery of what they're worrying about. And it's not a primary focus of life. So there's a lot of atheists at this stage, a lot of agnostics. So what prompts someone to go to the next stage of our vertical ascension? Well, it's things like, questions like, it's lonely at the top, money doesn't buy happiness, you can't take it with you. These sorts of thoughts start to creep in when these higher level needs have been met, materialistic needs have been met. And this also tends to kick in if someone's feeling personally lonely, that they don't have friends, they don't have a group. They've been so focused in this ego-based mindset that they really are seeking affinity. They really are seeking friends. And we've seen some famous people move from 5 to 6. Bill Gates, Oprah Winfrey, Warren Buffett, all of these billionaires are now donating money and actually actively assisting humanity. So you see them moving from stage 5 to stage 6. A person at this stage truly does care about their fellow man. We've reached a whole new level, a whole new worldview, which is why we at the Oracle Institute call this stage the first stage of new humans. Wilbur puts the tipping point after the next stage, stage 7, but I believe that this is the first meme that truly is envisioning a better world and truly wants to manifest it. So we call these new humans. Dr. Graves called this stage the sociocentric existence. Wilbur calls it world-centric because this meme has started to expand their definition of family. They're starting to go planetary, starting to go global. That starving child in India could be their starving child. These are the thoughts they're having. Suddenly universal health care makes sense. These people start thinking, maybe I should be paying more taxes. I should be paying my fair share. So the hallmark of this meme is egalitarianism. And it's egalitarianism to a fault. And what do I mean by that? The stage 6 perspective is the home of postmodernism. It is the home of relativism. Stage 6 doesn't quite see the complexity of the entire spiral yet. So since that level of awareness hasn't kicked in, they too have blinders on. And that's why Wilbur puts them underneath the tipping point. Here's his explanation of why. Now, you yourself might indeed have evolved from egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric. And so you will easily understand that all individuals are to be accorded equal consideration and equal opportunity regardless of race, sex, or creed. But this stance of universal pluralism, stage 6, you are genuinely multicultural and post-conventional. The problem is, most individuals that you treat with universal coverage do not share your universalism. They are still egocentric or ethnocentric to the core. So you are trying to extend universal consideration to individuals who will absolutely not extend the same courtesy to you. And this is part of the blinders that I'm talking about that stage 6 has. They're so idealistic. There's a naivete that goes along with this stage. This is the stage at which people stop reading the news. This is the stage at which they equate bad news with negative energy. This is the New Age movement. This is the meme that will say that the opposite of love is fear. And ask the Dalai Lama, how close am I to enlightenment? So Wilber calls this the ego's last stand, and I think that's true. It's like the ego fights to hold on to someone who's getting ready to take off in a second tier. So let's go back at the chart, look at the chart for a second. Because stage 6 is the ego's last stand, it convinces us that we're really close to perfection. And the result is that we can become very myopic. It convinces us that our only job is to evolve ourselves, and somehow magically the rest of the world will simply catch up. Today, this meme is not represented so much by hippies, but by the New Age movement and millennials, who at first blush can easily be confused with second-tier humans. But truthfully, most millennials are stage 6, as are the New Age adherents. They simply know the second-tier vocabulary, and when they express their world-centric view, it can appear that they're further along in terms of spiritual awareness than they are. They know how to talk the talk. The issue is, can they walk the walk? The good news is that stage 6 rejects aggression in any form as a method of conflict resolution. The other good news is that the Pew research is showing that this is the fastest growing meme. Even so, the level 6 power percentage is low because they rarely run for office. They don't want to sully themselves with things like politics. So, though another predominant we meme, like stage 4, they don't wish to get involved in politics. And that's another reason why the paradigm shift is stalling. Lastly, people at this stage of development really like to protest. And I'm bringing it up because I think it's really relevant to spiritual progression. So let's think of the Occupy movement. That was a stage 6 protest over stage 5 greed. And the reason Occupy fizzled is because of a lack of leadership. Leadership is a huge no-no at this level. Remember when I said that they're egalitarian to a fault? That means that no one is better, no one is smarter, no one is more gifted, no one should be leading a charge in any walk of life. So you end up with a lot of chiefs and very few Indians, which is why these protests fizzle, and again, why I think the paradigm shift is stalled. So let's talk about going second tier. This is where new humans really kick into gear. I'm going to give you Dr. Graves' description of how rare and monumental this phenomenon is. A sudden and almost unbelievable change in human behavior takes place when the individual begins to believe that psychological health should both be expressive of self and taking care of other human beings at the same time. What I find explains best the reason that level 7 people behave so much better quantitatively and qualitatively. They simply are not afraid. They're not afraid of not finding food. That's a stage 1 concern. They're not afraid that they're not going to have shelter, a stage 2 concern. They're not afraid of a predatory man, stage 3. They're not afraid of God, stage 4. They're not afraid of not having status or not making it on their own in the world. That's a stage 5 concern. And finally, they're not afraid of social rejection. That's stage 6. So the hallmark of the second tier is that fear is dropped as a motivator. It's not that people don't get scared or fearful, but fear as a driving force is no longer a stumbling block. Another hallmark of second tier is that people will not regress, theoretically, even under stress. And another hallmark is that second tier folks drop judgment. Why? Let's take a look. Imagine climbing a very tall and steep mountain. You climb and climb and climb until you almost reach the top. But before you can get to the top of the mountain, you spot this lovely plateau where you can rest a while and catch your breath before the final and most difficult ascent. And while you're resting on this plateau, you look down the mountain at all the ground you've covered. You're in awe of this achievement. In fact, you're in awe of the entire experience. You remember when you were at the foot of the mountain and had the entire journey before you. You remember yourself at each of the first tier memes, and you accept those parts of yourself which still identify with those memes. Wilbur says that we transcend and include each meme as we move up the spiral. So, for example, we see the beauty at the stage 2 magical meme, an untarnished innocence with which we reconnect. We also appreciate the loyalty and dedication of the level 4 fundamentalist meme. This was the Great Depression that fought World War II and sacrificed for all of us. So the net result of going second tier is that we now accept people for where they are on the spectrum, and we drop our judgment. So let's look at second tier in a little more detail, because these are the folks who are ready, willing, and able to push the world, help pull the world into this spiritual paradigm. And these are also the people who are going to hopefully help define the future face of spirit. Stage 7 is another I meme. But now it's about my service to the world. What can I contribute? What can I do to save, not just myself, but the rest of the planet? And that includes not just Earth's inhabitants, but Mother Earth herself. A person at this stage has mastered ego and rarely worries about herself. This meme is motivated by justice in the truest sense of the word. And these folks are motivated by a newborn access to, though not mastery, of universal truth. They really are seeking the objective truth that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. They also want to share their new awareness, their new consciousness with the world. So second tier folks already live in the new world, essentially. And they're doing all that they can do to help manifest it in the sense of having it appear to the rest of us. Let's take a look at the next slide. On the other hand, stage 7 new humans can have a pretty tough time of it. Why? Because they have achieved a heightened state of consciousness, but they're living in the old world, where approximately 95% of the population doesn't get it yet. So they can get frustrated. They can get burnt out due to overexertion because they've touched the ground of being. They don't necessarily know how to show the way, but they want to desperately. At stage 8, the picture becomes even more clear. This is when the stage 7 person finds her heart space and moves into a new level of consciousness. And this is so very rare. Wilbur estimates that less than 1% of the population is at stage 8. Nevertheless, most stage 6 pluralists think they're at this stage. And there are reasons for that. The vocabulary tends to be the same. They're both we memes. They can talk very, very much similarly, but it's easy to tell when it's a level 8 you're speaking with. They absolutely glow. This is the realm of Mahatma Gandhi, Desmond Tutu, Mother Teresa. These are people on the human stage who have become just classic heroes, not even just in a spiritual sense, but in all aspects of how we move humanity along toward the light. These people truly model love and compassion, and they do show the way to the next generation. Level 9, this is beyond rare. Now we're talking about humans who have actually started to merge with the light. Such people can move into the non-dual realm at will. And now we're talking about the very high mystics, the saints, the avatars, people like Jesus, Teresa of Avila, Rumi, Rabia. They're transcendent souls, divine, and able to manifest the fifth spiritual paradigm. They can do it by using the power of the light, because this is the meme during which you come full circle in one sense, because it is the I am meme. I was very fortunate to take an integral incubator with Ken Wilber, and luckier still to be called upon. He was going to take 3 questions. And my question to Ken Wilber was, what do you think is going to happen first? Will the stage 3 and 4 memes start World War III, their apocalyptic battle, that they actually, some of them are actually looking forward to? Or will 10% of the planet go second tier, which is the point at which Wilbur says humanity will follow along? He uses a few examples of that. He uses the Revolutionary War. There were probably only about 10% of the colonists who wanted to go to battle with England. He also uses as an example the civil rights movement. We had to drag certain Southerners kicking and screaming into the civil rights era. So when I asked that question, Ken really perked up. And it took him over an hour to answer my question. He concluded basically by saying he gives us no better than a 50-50 chance. And this is one of the quotes. Ken says, every stage of evolution eventually runs into its own inherent limitations, and these may act as triggers for the self-transcending drives. The inherent limitations create a type of turmoil, even chaos, and the system either breaks down or escapes this chaos by evolving to a higher degree of order, so-called order out of chaos. And how we handle this, how we collectively handle this, will determine whether a new and more adequate worldview emerges to diffuse these problems, or whether we are buried in our wastes. So not only do we presently possess an insufficient number of new humans to build this new world, we also are in a race against time. This slide, which is labeled the God Gap Dilemma, shows what's happening on the ground. And I updated some of these stats just this week with the latest Pew report at the end of 2019. These numbers compare 2019 figures to 2009, and that's the last time Pew did its broad examination. So let's look at stage 3. I'm going with Wilbur's estimates here. Pew doesn't really address, or it's hard to sort of spin out of their stats what they would view as the percentage. But at stage 4, the fundamentalist evangelical meme, Pew says that it's only slightly down in the last decade, from 28% to 25% of the population. So while there is a small decline, they're essentially holding their own in terms of their percentage population of America. What's more interesting is the what's happening at stage 5, the more orthodox view of God meme. So currently they represent 38% of the population. Less than half are attending services monthly. And there's also a huge generation gap with those who self-describe as Christian. So of that 38%, 84% come from the silent generation. 76% of the boomers say they're still Christian, but only 49% of millennials say they're Christian. And so what's happening? What's happening is that stage 6 is growing the fastest. It's up 17% from where it was in 2009. So 26% of the American population now self-describes as nuns. And there were some more interesting stats that I pulled out of the report. One is that there are more Democrats than Republicans who describe themselves as non-affiliating with any religion. Also, there are more men than women. And then with regard to stage 7, again, that's pretty hard to tease out, but I'm going to go with Wilbur's estimate that there's about 5% of the population that's second tier. The net result is what we call at the Oracle Institute, the God Gap. And the God Gap isn't so much expressed in the numbers themselves, but it's expressed in worldview. So we've got with the bell curve we just looked at, we have a group of humans who are still subscribing to the Abrahamic religions and the evangelical notions of God, and then we've got a group of humans that are way beyond it in terms of creating new belief systems, which is the focus of the series. The other thing that we're seeing at the Oracle Institute is that this God gap manifests in is manifesting in more and more aggression. That too is part of the Trump era. So what before we would call a culture war is getting more dire. So that was another point that we feel is important to make. This polarization in the God gap means that, or the upside, the good news is, to me anyway, it appears that this great cusp is climaxing. It's becoming more dangerous, but it's climaxing, which means at some point we're going to go downhill on the roller coaster. It also means that the fifth paradigm is already with us. So let's talk about the millennials for a second, because they're already helping us see what the future face of spirit's going to look like. Many of them are into nature mysticism. They're finding God hiking, skiing, just being out in nature. And it's a really beautiful iteration of what we saw earlier with the tribalistic meme of, you know, thousands and thousands of years ago, because what happens is their archetypes really start repeating at higher levels. So when we see nature mysticism kick in, it's not the old expression, it's a brand new expression, and it's quite beautiful. Futurists and a dear friend of mine, Barbara Marx Hubbard, said that we were entering the first age of conscious evolution. She described the new human, actually gave it a name, Homo Universalis, and she was also excited about what was coming. She passed last year, but I wanted to read just a brief quote from one of her books called An Evolutionary Synthesis, A New Worldview. Barbara says, "We are the first generation to be aware of the process of evolution and that we are a conscious participant in it. The reality is that we are naturally co-creating small islands of coherence in the sea of social chaos. By the natural tendency of nature to form new whole systems out of separate parts, people are linking up with each other and connecting their projects that are working. We may be one evolutionary instant from networking the networks. The internet and other news media is our expanded nervous system. We may well be at the threshold of a nonlinear exponential interaction of innovating elements such that the system can cooperate in its own self-transcendence. Our turn on the spiral represents the culmination of 14 billion years of evolution on Earth, now coming into form as a planetary universal species, capable of understanding its own evolution and learning its own birth story, beginning to evolve with nature and to co-create with the deeper patterns of creation, internalized as our own spiritual motivation to love, create, and evolve." Given the gravity of the challenges facing us, we at Oracle feel it's very important to anchor the notion that we're all in this together. That's going to be one of the primary motivators for developing a new belief system that is universal. It also will help us forge that second-tier perspective. At the Oracle Institute, we talk about the God game. What's God up to, and who is God, and what is God, and what's our next move? This issue of What is Enlightenment magazine, which came out in 2007, is actually how I learned of Ken Wilber. I was at Book Expo America in Washington, D.C., and we had just won our first book award at Oracle Press, and it was for my book, The Truth. And they were giving out free copies of their magazine, and somebody handed me this magazine, and I entered a whole new dimension on the spot. So what is God's next move? What's going on with this God game? Where are we headed? Which is basically what I was asked to predict. I believe that with the number of new humans growing, that we are going to be able to employ a cross-disciplinary approach to crafting the fifth spiritual paradigm. New humans are going to demand that the new spiritual path, however it manifests, is going to comport with a checklist of healthy attributes. In my first book, there's a chapter in there called The 7 Rules of Any Good Religion, and it's a checklist on what constitutes a healthy religion. So one of the one of the beliefs that we have here is that any new faith that does emerge, or that does attract a sufficient number of new humans to become the next religion or belief system, are going to have to comport with these 7 rules. The first one is it's going to have to philosophically be sound. It's going to have to be logical. The days of magical thinking are over. That's the first one. Tightly related to that is science. The second rule is it's going to have to be scientifically meaningful. Fortunately, the discoveries in the quantum realm are starting to support what mystics have been saying for thousands of years. So that the merger of science and spirituality is getting closer and closer by the day. But that's the second rule. The third rule is that the new belief system has to be moral. And in that regard, I'm talking about universal morality. We're not talking about individual cultural belief systems. We're not talking about relativism anymore. We're talking big picture moral, which means everyone is treated the same and everyone is treated well. The third one, or actually the fourth one, is justice. The notion, since second tier begins with a return to and a desire to know the truth, and even the truth about God, this notion of justice has to be incorporated into the new belief system. The fifth rule is that it's got to be inclusive. It has to be a religion that accepts everyone. There's no hierarchy, no more patriarchy, and that doesn't mean, back to relativism, it does not mean that there aren't going to be people who are more equipped to help lead church services, for example, but what it means is that everybody is welcome. No more tribalistic or nationalistic thinking is going to be permitted. Next, it's going to be a belief system that's very open. And by that, we mean curious, because if your faith doesn't get you excited about what's around the next turn, what's around the next bend, what might I learn next, it's really not a healthy belief system. So whoever leads such a faith had better be a patient person, because there's going to be a lot of questions. And then the last sort of characteristic of what I perceive coming is that spirituality at its essence is going to be just more organic. It's going to be less structured, and it's going to feel not just more welcoming, but it's going to feel that we're all contributing to the belief system. And that too is going to be hard for the old-fashioned kind of minister or priest, because people want to have an active involvement in their spirituality. They want to feel that they're really participating and co-creating it. Another thing is, as new humans start finding one another, and we are self-segregating, by the way. The big sort started over a decade ago. People are living and moving and living with like-minded souls, which is both good and bad. But as new humans find one another and stick together, they're going to start feeling a little less nervous about what's coming themselves. We'll be reinforcing one another. We'll be creating intentional communities together where we can experiment and also model what's coming. So even though we're still living in this very dualistic and materialistic and misogynistic, barbaric, frankly, fourth paradigm, new humans are going to be able to encourage one another, and they're going to be able to inspire one another. And I see that as a significant component of the future face of spirit. The other thing I think is going to happen is we're going to return to some amazing metaphysical traditions that the New Age movement didn't have the patience to explore, or didn't have the desire to explore. And by that I mean proven models like Buddhism, but I mean taking it seriously, not the American cafeteria type of Buddhism, like really studying it, studying the Kabbalah. It's a great mystical path for a deeper understanding of the cosmos. And one of my favorites, probably my favorite book of all time, is a little skinny book called The Kabbalion that they say was written by the 3 initiates. And this is a Hermetic tradition book, and I'm going to show you a slide that just shows you really quickly what this book's about. So in the Kabbalion, they talk about the 7 laws of the universe, and they're nested and they're holarchical, which is also part of what we're realizing about how humans and in fact all life exists. That small little circle in the middle, or the smallest circle, is the law of gender. This planet doesn't even get the law of gender. Okay, we haven't even mastered the law of gender, which is the easiest, the simplest, and the most basic of the 7 metaphysical laws described in the Kabbalion. What I find interesting is that the 5th paradigm, and it's not just as I describe it, as many, many others describe it, it's about getting the Godhead in balance. When we get the Godhead in balance, with the return of divine feminine energy, and hopefully we'll be envisioning a deity that's both genderful and genderless, and it'll be energetic, and it won't be anthropomorphic, we'll know that we've conquered the law of gender. Back to the trickle-down deity theory, until we nail the law of gender collectively on planet Earth, we're not going to progress. There's also evidence that we're getting the law of gender and really, really integrating it. For me, when I see all the gender fluidity, which is why that other symbol is there, not just the male and female symbol, you know, some people say it's gender confusion, but I think it's fascinating that many, many young people are really questioning what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what does it mean to be both. We happen to have a young woman here on our campus who prefers the pronoun they. All of that to me is evidence that we're about to nail the law of gender and move on into the 5th paradigm, after which all these other principles come into play. I'll just mention polarity real quickly. Without understanding the law of polarity, you really can't assist humanity in progressing. And I'm almost out of time today, but I'm going to be writing about this in the 3rd book in the Oracle series. So this model, to me, is a classic model, and it represents what I think new humans are going to want to see when they start getting serious about discussing God and also discussing future belief systems. In my mind, new humans are charged with the sacred responsibility of getting serious about their spirituality so that they can assist others. To be a 2nd-tier human means to be obligated to help others, by definition. We are all in this grand adventure together. And the sense that 2nd-tier has of being duty-bound to assist is part of what we call the God game. More and more people are starting to feel that. It's actually not even a choice, it's a compulsion. When the evolutionary impulse pierces your brain, your heart, your soul, you don't have a choice. And more people are feeling that way. So it really is an exciting time to be alive. It's an exciting time to be a minister, a teacher like I am. And I just want to say that I think we do have the power to make it through the gray cusp, come out on the other side of it, and craft these new belief systems, which are going to just be so much more soul enriching. I want to leave you with a thought. We're getting ready to close. The thought is this. This has nothing to do with IQ. This has nothing to do with any sort of factor that leads many people to hate this research. It's not elitist. It's not about that at all. And to help prove the point, I just wanted to throw this out to the listener. See if you can tell the difference between the IQ of these meme representatives. So I've got Vladimir Putin down here for level 3. He's a smart mofo. John McCain at level 4. Dick Cheney at level 5. Oprah Winfrey at level 6. Barack Obama, who I think was at stage 7. And then Nelson Mandela at stage 8. So please eliminate any of those concerns when you look at this research if it's new to you. It's not about that. It's about understanding why people believe what they believe and getting us out of the world of relativism, saying some belief systems are better than others. Some are. Some are less aggressive, some are less deadly, some are more inspiring. Some belief systems really are better than others. For those who want to do a deeper dive and challenge themselves to become second tier, I just really quickly wanted to put up this roadmap. These are the 3 books, the Oracle Foundational Trilogy. The first is The Truth, the second is The Love, the third is The Light, and The New Human. And they track the memes. The Truth was written predominantly when I was going through my stage 7 crisis. I'm not going to claim to be beyond that, but The Love is about unconditional love and what stage 8 humans experience. And right now I'm working on The Light, which is an even finer manual for those who wish to ascend the spiral. So to summarize, new humans are people who have achieved a stupendous state of awareness. They've moved up the spiral into second tier. And these are the people who are going to help lead the effort to sculpt the face of spirit in the future. These are people who do comprehend truth and are seeking to know absolute truth. These are people who have completely integrated a sense of compassion for the world, the love. And these are people who are not toying with it, but are serious about attaining the elevated state of non-duality. These are all just amazing goals, which more and more people on this side of the God gap are seeking, whereas on the other side of the God gap, people are, a lot of them are living in fear and anxiety. So that is going to be our goal moving forward. Lastly, I just want to really quickly show one last slide. So if you happen to live near us in Southwestern Virginia, I just wanted to let you know there is a home for you. It is at the Oracle Institute, and we've got a lot going on down here. We've got a spirituality school. We've got our publishing house. We do have a church. It's called Oracle Temple. We also have the Peace Pentagon brand, and it's our altered state brand, because through the Peace Pentagon website, we do sacred activism. And we've actually learned that some people don't want to mix their religion and politics. I don't understand it, frankly, but apparently that's a problem for some people. So we try to keep the spirituality off of the Peace Pentagon site and focus on how to build a better world. And lastly, we have the Valley of Light intentional community, which we're building here. And I just wanted to say, the intentional community is what I'm the most excited about, because that's where we're truly going to experiment with all of the ideas that we've talked about today. And I just want to add that it's patterned on the only second tier community I am aware of, called the Federation of Damanhur in Italy. And it's like getting on a spaceship and jettisoning yourself into the future about 100 years. So that's what we're doing here. Giving a shout out to anybody who might want to join such a community. And I also wanted to mention that part of our work is with the Earth Federation movement. There are a group of humans who are working steadfastly at getting the word out about an Earth Constitution, and we're very involved with them. And since we're systems thinkers and a think tank, we see the interconnection of all of these sections. They all interconnect. So that's the last thought I want to express, is that the future face of spirit is going to be interconnected with all the other pieces of what we think a civilized society should have. And it's going to be expressive of all of those interconnections, all that web, the web of life. It has been such a pleasure to be with you today, and a great honor. And I really want to thank the JFK University Department of Consciousness for inviting me to do this video today. Thank you.